Okay. You guys can all hear me. We are going to start the class. B'ezrat Hashem, we're doing it upstairs today. And we're going to continue on our topic of Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni. That's Bishul on Shabbat. And we're going to, B'ezrat Hashem, learn more about Kli Sheni today, just as a quick overview from what we learned last week. Kli Rishon is the first vessel that is sitting on an open fire or a fire source, and that is going to be the main kli, the main receptacle that is not allowed to have in it any non-cooked items. If there's a non-cooked item in it, then it will be considered cooking, and that's mevushal. That's cooking on Shabbat, which is a prohibition from the Torah. And so that's the inyan, that's the idea of a Kli Rishon. And we learned also that if you pour from the Kli Rishon into a Kli Sheni, which is the second vessel, then we are a little bit more lenient. And we said that there is more room to be lenient with that. And I will learn more about that today. And then we said also there's even a Kli Shlishi, which is if you pour from the Kli Sheni, from the second vessel, into a third vessel. And so that's where we are today. Okay, let's start. A Kli Sheni is the utensil into which someone poured the food or water from the utensil in which it was cooked. Although that food or water may be still scalding hot or even hotter, it does not have the power to cook halachically. So that means if you take from the Kli Rishon and you put it into a Kli Sheni, even though it's still, we defined the term Yad Soledet Bo last time as scalding hot, and we said that the Yalkut Yosef brings it down that scalding hot, that it is the ability to it's hot enough to burn yourself, that you can't eat it or drink it because it's so hot. That's called scalding hot. So even if you pour from a Kli Rishon into a Kli Sheni, it gets colder a little bit, and therefore we say that it does not have the power to cook halachically. Therefore, once the food or water is in a Kli Sheni, it is permitted on Shabbat to insert an uncooked food into that food or water in order to heat it. And like we talked last time, that if, let's say, you have frozen milk, or for a baby you want to warm up a bottle, you can place the bottle into the Kli Sheni and have it warmed up. Likewise, one may add any amount of cold water, even a little, to a Kli Sheni filled with scalding hot water, although the cold water will itself become scalding hot. And we talked about that last time also, that adding the cold water to the Kli Sheni is allowed, which is unlike, we said, to the Kli Rishon, or if you add a small amount of cold water to the Kli Rishon, we said that is going to get hot and it's going to boil, and that's going to be an isur, that's a prohibition of cooking on Shabbat. Any questions on that? Okay, if not, we will continue. Just make sure. Okay. Foods that can be cooked even in a Kli Sheni. So there's some foods scalding hot. Did I lose? Can you guys hear me again?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. So we said that there's an object called Kli Bishul, a food called Kli Bishul, that it is so easily cooked that even in a Kli Sheni that is Yad Soledet Bo, that it's hot, scalding hot, in that situation, you cannot place the raw egg or the Kli Bishul into the Kli Sheni because it will cook it, even though we said a general rule that a Kli Sheni doesn't cook, that is for a majority of the items, but for certain items, which are relatively easier to cook, they cannot be placed into a Kli Sheni as long as it's still scalding hot. Some poskim rule that this is forbidden by the Torah, and it is a capital offense of Shabbat desecration, but others rule that it is forbidden by rabbinical injunction only. So that's whether it's deoraita or derabbanan. Some poskim rule that an egg is the only item that may be considered a Kli Bishul, that can be cooked in a Kli Sheni. So some poskim say the only time this can happen is with an egg, because an egg is the only time that you have a something so easily cooked that can happen in a Kli Sheni. As explained above, however, one should refrain from placing tea leaves in a Kli Sheni filled with scalding hot water, since there are poskim who rule that tea leaves are Kli Bishul as well. And we talked about that last week as well, that when someone wants to make tea, and we're going to see that in a second, that it's best to use a Kli Shlishi, that after you place the hot water in a Kli Sheni, you want to take that water and place it into another Kli, into another vessel, which will make it a Kli Shlishi, and that will be permitted to use for making tea. It is permissible to pour boiling hot water from a Kli Sheni onto tea leaves. So let's say you take, because the Kli Shlishi has no power to cook at all for all cases halakhically, and we're not worried about that. Okay. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay. If not, we'll continue. Many people are accustomed to insert mint leaves in hot tea on Shabbat, even though the tea is as hot as Yad Soled Bo. There is a basis to permit this, since the cup of tea is a Kli Sheni, which has no. Mint leaves are among the Kli Bishul. So we're saying mint leaves. We don't consider them to be Kli Bishul. We don't consider them to be easily cooked, and so we are allowed to take those mint leaves and put it in to a Kli Sheni that has hot water, Yad Soled Bo, and we're not going to be worried that that's considered Bishul. But one who refrains from relying on this leniency will receive a special blessing from heaven. And with a lot of the halachot on Shabbat, you'll see that they say if you're going to be more strict on certain halachot, that you will be blessed from heaven, and who doesn't want more blessings? So anyone who does use mint leaves in his tea must make sure that the leaves are free of infestation, right? Even though we said that it's permissible on Shabbat, we have to still make sure that there's no bugs, because bugs is also you cannot eat. When in doubt of the leaves' status, he may cover his cup with a cloth and drink his tea through the cloth. That's fine. Alternatively, one may fashion a makeshift tea bag by folding a cloth around the mint leaves and dipping it into the cup of tea. Either choice is permitted on Shabbat and is not an act of manachav borer, nor that of melabeh. Something that is easily cooked can't even be put into a Kli Sheni. And we said the best example of that is a raw egg, because a raw egg is very easily cooked, and so we don't want to put the raw egg inside the Kli Sheni because it might be cooked in the process. Some poskim ruled that it is forbidden to drop a slice of lemon into a cup of tea as long as it is hot as Yad Soled Bo. So now, if I have a Kli Sheni and I want to put lemon into my tea, some poskim rule that it might be forbidden to put the lemon because it might get cooked. Although the cup is only a Kli Sheni, a lemon is a tart fruit, and even a Kli Sheni has the power to cook it, as is the case with Kli Bishul. Other poskim rule that it is permitted, and technically the halacha is like the lenient opinion. So if someone wants to take lemon and dip it into his tea on Shabbat, he's allowed to. We don't say that's a problem as long as it's from a Kli Sheni and not a Kli Rishon. Kli Rishon, we know that it's still forbidden because that would be Bishul. but placing it into a Kli Sheni and then putting the lemon, that's fine. And so technically we go by the lenient opinion, but like we said last time, whoever follows the stricter opinion, they'll have a bracha from heaven. Some poskim ruled that a solid food, such as rice, meat, or fish, retains the power to cook even after they are emptied out of the Kli Rishon in which it was cooked and into a Kli Sheni. So now if I have something hot, hot meat that's been on the fire for 10 hours or how long, 2-3 hours, it gets very hot. Right now I take that and I put it on my plate to eat. The question is, can I put gravy or ketchup onto it or sauce? Will that heat it up and make bishul? Would that cause cooking? So we said that there might be they might still have some poskim say that they still have the power to cook. So maybe there's a little layer on the top that will get cooked if you place the sauce or place the ketchup onto the meat or the rice or the fish. These poskim claim that it is only when a liquid is poured from a Kli Rishon into a Kli Sheni that it no longer has the power to cook, because the walls of the Kli Sheni cool it off. A solid food retains the status of a Kli Rishon wherever it may be until it is no longer as hot as Yad Soledet Bom. So we said with a food, with a drink, when you place it into a cup, it fills up the cup. It touches all the sides. So when it's hot, as Yad Soledet Bo, it'll cool off because it touches the cold cup or the cold vessel, which isn't the case with food, solid food, rice, meat, or fish, that it doesn't touch all the sides. It just touches the plate, and therefore it's still going to be very hot. And it could be as hot as Yad Soledet Bo. So it still has the power to cook according to these poskim of Yad Soledet Bo. But other poskim ruled that any food, liquid or solid, loses its power to cook once it is transferred to a Kli Sheni. And according to this opinion, it is permitted on Shabbat to pour cold broth or gravy onto scalding hot rice or meat or fish that is placed on a Kli Sheni. And in practice, the halacha is according to the second opinion. So if I take my piece of meat that I'm going to eat on Shabbat, it's been on the fire, it's been on the plata, right? It's very hot now. I want to take some cold gravy and I want to put it on it. Is there going to be a problem? Well, we said according to some, yes, and according to some, no. And we're going to go with the halacha. We're going to go in the lenient opinion and say that when we place the gravy onto the hot piece of meat, we're going to say that it is permissible. So, just an overview. So far, we've talked about, or I started talking about today about Kli Sheni. So we talked last week about Kli Rishon, and today we're moving on to have the ability to be cooked when it's in a Kli Sheni. With that in mind, though, there are still other things. When we said tea leaves, also, I think we talked about that last week. Also, that if you put tea leaves into a Kli Sheni, it could be cooked. Also, we said lemon. You could maybe put it into a Kli Sheni, which we said is the second vessel. Even though that we said some things that is a tart fruit that has that sour taste, it's easily cooked. We don't. There's poskim that say it's permissible, but if someone is refraining from doing that, he doesn't put the lemon in his tea, then he will get a special bracha. And then the last thing we just said is hot solid foods. So hot rice, hot fish, hot meat. If you want to take a hot piece of meat that you just took off the plata, it's hot as Yad Soledet Bo, meaning you can't eat it because it's going to burn you. You want to make sure. We thought that maybe if you take the cold broth or the cold gravy and you want to put it on top, it might cause some cooking. But we said we go with the lenient opinion, and we say that it is permissible. So if I want to take cold sauce and put it on my hot fish or hot meat, that's fine. We're not worried that it's going to be cooked. Now, what happens if I want to add cold milk to my hot coffee? Okay, so I made my coffee in a Kli Sheni. Can I take that and put it into put the milk into it, or am I going to have to put the whole coffee into the Kli Shlishi and then put the milk into it? So she wants to. I wonder. Does Rabbi have problems with the Wi-Fi usually? Does he have problems with the Wi-Fi?
The Wi-Fi?
Yeah, no.
No.
No. Can you guys hear me? They can hear me. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Sorry about that. Okay. So we just said that if someone wants to put cold milk into their hot coffee, they are allowed to, because we're not worried that the cold milk that is placed into the hot coffee, which is in a Kli Sheni, will cook up the small amount of milk. So it says no liquids are included in the category of Kli Bishul, and it is likewise permissible to pour scalding hot tea from a thermos into a cup containing a bit of milk, since the thermos is a Kli Sheni. When hot liquid is poured from a Kli Sheni, it has no power to cook. The milk has been boiled once before. There is even stronger basis to be lenient, because again, it's just going to get hotter because it's already been cooked. So with milk, you can add it to your coffee in a Kli Sheni, or if you want, you can take it from the Kli Sheni and put it into the Kli Rishon. Okay. So some poskim ruled that it is forbidden to soak raw food in a Kli Sheni containing water. We're worried that if you put raw food into a Kli Sheni with very hot yad soledet water, it might cook a little bit. So some poskim ruled that it is forbidden. But although a Kli Sheni does not have the power to cook, like we said earlier, usually Kli Sheni, which is the second vessel that you transfer the hot water from, it doesn't have the power to cook, and therefore other poskim rule that it is permitted to place these raw foods into a Kli Sheni, but not a Kli Rishon. Kli Rishon, we know still it's completely asur, it's completely forbidden.
So I can put oat,
Oats,
and have the water. But the container is second Kli Sheni.
So if you take the oats, right,
yeah,
and you want to pour it from the Kli Rishon
yeah,
onto it, that's not allowed, because it's going to hit the oats before it hits the actual container.
Oh, so before the water, first the water, then add.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be the. I think we're going to talk about that soon. I think. If not, no, that's a great question. Because if we had it first, then the first thing that is coming from the Kli Rishon, it would hit the oats, and it would cook the oats. Okay.
Yes.
So that would be not allowed. Okay. Nonetheless, it says it is certainly forbidden to pour scalding. Oh, here. It is certainly forbidden to pour scalding hot water from a Kli Rishon onto the raw food, like we were saying, right? Because as the hot water comes into contact with the food, it has the power to cook, and then you're cooking. So you're right on the money. But it says also, one who is strict, he will receive a blessing from heaven. So if he doesn't soak the hot food in a Kli Sheni, let's say he puts into a Kli Shlishi and then he puts the food, that's the best thing to do. And it says that he will receive a bracha, he will receive a blessing from Hashem if he does it that way. Okay, so if I were to tell you how to do it, put the water into a Kli Sheni, move that to a Kli Shlishi, and then you can add the oats, or you can have the oats in there and add from the Kli Sheni to the Kli Shlishi. There's no problem with that if you want to make oatmeal. There is no prohibition against cooking a solid food on Shabbat if it was already completely cooked before Shabbat. So we said earlier that there's this idea called there's no cooking after cooking. So if something's already cooked, it can't be cooked again. Okay, so if I take a solid piece of cooked meat and I want to warm it up for eating during the day, I can put it on the plata. We're going to see it in a second. There's certain restrictions, of course, um, but on the basic level, if I have a piece of meat and it's already cooked, and if I put it on the fire, it's only going to get worse. Then I can put it on the fire, and by worse, it's only going to get more burned, or it's going to get um, drier, whatever it is. It may be placed next to, but not on top of, an uncovered fire. So if it's an uncovered fire, meaning it's just a fire, which we don't usually use. We usually either use the oven or we use a plata, or we cover the fire with something called a blech, right? In those situations, there is no problem to put it straight on. But if it's an uncovered flame, if it's a straight up just a flame, then it would be asur. It would be prohibited to place that solid food onto the flame, because even though that there's no cooking, even though there's no cooking, there's still the sight. Someone might look and see and think that it is that you're cooking. So we don't want to do that. The fact that one did not place it over the fire serves to remind us not to stoke the coals or otherwise raise the fire's intensity. So we said that you can't put it straight on the fire, but you can place it next to the fire to warm up. Because when it's not on the fire, then it'll be it'll be something recognizable that he knows that it's okay. It's not on the fire. Why is it not on the fire? Because it's Shabbat. So he remembers, okay, now I can't put the fire hotter or lower, so it won't either burn or make the food warmer in time. Likewise, on Shabbat, solid foods may be placed on top of a pot that was sitting over an uncovered fire since before Shabbat began. So let's say it's kind of like a blech, right? You take a pot, you flip it over onto the fire, it somehow lasts, and the pot gets really hot. You can place the meat on top of the pot, is nowadays, or over a gas fire covered with a metal sheet. So in that situation, it's fine because there's some recognizable thing that it's not the normal way of cooking, right? We normally don't place a metal sheet on top of a gas grill, and we don't usually cook on a plata, especially if it's meat or chicken or rice. We don't usually cook that on the plata, on the electric warming tray. And so even though the foods will be scalding hot, that's fine, okay, as long as they were cooked before Shabbat, because we say there's no cooking after cooking. All the above applies even if the food has been refrigerated since before Shabbat began. So let's say you cooked something on Friday, you put it in the fridge, and you said, okay, I'm going to eat that, or you don't even have to say you cooked it for Shabbat. Now come Saturday morning, and before all the husbands come home from shul, the wives put the so it says one may not place the cooked liquid onto a fire on Shabbat unless one fulfills all the conditions in Siman 253, which it's over there. It says that if you want to do chazara, you want to replace. Okay, so if I have a hot soup from before Shabbat and I take it off the fire, the only time I can replace it on the fire is if it didn't leave my hands and if it's still scalding hot. Okay, still yad soleted bo. If it loses one of those criteria, then it cannot be put back on the plata. So those are the main things, and that's why we're a little bit more lenient when it comes, or strict when it comes to liquids. So let's say you make soup, right? You put it in the fridge, and you want to eat it for Saturday morning. It's a cold day. It'll warm you up. So if you're Sephardi, can't do that, because once you cannot do that. Even if it was cooked before Shabbat, now that it's cold, you put it back on the warming tray. We're scared that it's gonna warm to the point where it's scalding hot, it starts to boil, and that will be cooking on Shabbat according to the Sfaradim. Again, according to the Ashkenazim, they rule differently. They say it's permissible, but not us. So if someone wants to eat soup on Shabbat, you should do so at night, at the night one, because you can leave it from Shabbat before Shabbat. You can put the pot before Shabbat, and he can leave it until the meal. Technically, if he wants to, he can leave the pot on the plata on the oven and go until Saturday morning. I don't know if that will work. It might burn up all the soup, but if someone wants to, they can do that. But as the two main things, that if he wants to take it off the fire, it has to still be scalding hot. It still has to be very hot. That if you try to eat it, you'll burn. And you can't leave it from your hands or put it on the ground. That you cannot do. If even one of those things you do, either it gets too cold or you put it on the counter, put it on the floor, leaves your hands, then you cannot put it back on the warming tray. Okay? Any questions on that?
Well, in this time, the season is very hot, and the food can spoil, the refrigerator, it can be spoiled. So what you do in your house, the food, just leave it there.
Oh, so you're putting it back into the fridge?
Because in this time,
Mm-hmm.
the food very easy could be spoiled.
Mm-hmm.
So in your family, you don't put the food in the refrigerator.
No. So you're allowed to put the food in the refrigerator. So let's say you had the food on the plata, you ate, but there's leftovers, right? You can take the leftovers and put it back in the fridge. There's no problem with that.
You can put it back on the
So you can put it in the back on the plata only if it's solid foods.
So
Solid. If it's liquid, you can't put it back on the plata.
Point.
So, yeah.
Liquid can have the soup after the fact.
Yeah. After the soup was taken off the plata, and you put it on the ground, or it's less than yad soledet bo, then it's game over. You can't put it back on the plata, and you lost your chance for eating warm soup on Shabbat. If you want cold soup, that's fine. But food, let's say meat, you put the meat in the fridge before Shabbat. You can take that out and put it on the plata in the morning, on the warm plate on the warming tray in the morning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So now the question is, what if there's a mixture? There's solid food, but there's also gravy or sauce on it. So it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So some poskim ruled that if a pot of food contains both solids and liquids, sauces, as long as most of its contents are solids, the entire pot of food is considered a solid food. So if it's majority of food, of solid food, a lot of meat or a lot of rice or a lot of chicken, or on the chicken, so you see it's you can barely find the chicken inside all the sauce. So at that point,
he's telling you to have stew on Shabbat, not soup.
Yeah. So, therefore, if it has already been cooked, it may be brought to a boil again on a fire on Shabbat. So even let's say you took that food, you had it on Friday night, you put it back in the fridge, took it out, even though there's still sauce on it, you can put it on as long as there's not so much sauce that it's majority of the food. Okay. Other poskim ruled that one may place a cooked food on the fire on Shabbat only if it is totally solid food without broth, such as hard-boiled eggs, fish, fried chicken, rice. Such food may be placed on an electric warming tray or a fire covered with a sheet of metal. Any food that contains even a little bit of broth, however, is considered a liquid food and may not be brought to a boil on Shabbat according to this opinion. Technically, the halacha follows the first opinion. So like what we said earlier, even though there's two opinions, most things in halacha, there's usually machloket, there's usually two opinions at least. So over here, again, we have two opinions. One say that it's permissible to have the meat with the sauce as long as the meat is the majority. But then there's another one that says even if it has a little bit of sauce, we're worried that if you put it on the fire, it might boil, and that'll be bishul. That'll be considered be considered cooking. So The halacha technically follows the first opinion, that's saying we're allowed to take the meat that has a sauce on it and put that onto the plata. They say just so we know that the logic of the second opinion is a flawed. Why? Because almost every food has some kind of liquid in it. Even meat or chicken, inside you'll see that there's a little bit of a liquid. Even if it's completely cooked, sometimes there's still liquid inside the chicken or the meat. It's still moist, right? So even according to their opinions, then you could say that almost every food has liquids in it, and it might be boiled if you put it back on the plata. So we don't go by that opinion. We go by the first opinion, which said that you can take the meat that has sauce, or the chicken or fish that has sauce, and put that straight onto the plata. And he brings down a little bit more on why the logic is a little flawed. He says, furthermore, when a cooked food is heated up, some of its broth evaporates and its quality is impaired. There's an idea that on Shabbat, if it impairs the quality of the food, then it's not fine for cooking, but it's fine for shehiyah, which means leaving it on the plata. Rabbeinu Yerucham ruled that if the further cooking of a cooked liquid food impairs its quality, it is not considered melacha mevushal, and it is permitted on Shabbat. Many poskim don't hold like that, but then there's some that do hold like him. And since one's intentions aren't to warm the liquid, it's to warm the food, the solid food, and it happens to be that the liquid is also there. So you have a case of something that is not what do you call it? That you didn't have intentions on it. It's a something that it's a machloket that you didn't have intentions on it, and you can be a little bit lenient specifically over here. But it's, of course, it says anyone who follows the strict opinion and refrains from cooking a cooked meal that is has broth on it on Shabbat on an open fire, then he will get a special bracha. And then there's over here, it just says for Ashkenazi Jews that they have the practice of reheating any food, even if it is totally liquid, like we said earlier with the soup. Even if he wants to take the soup that was cold and put it on the plata, he is allowed to, even if it was lower than room temperature. As long as it has not been cooled down from its previous heating to room temperature. So if he had it on the plata and he took it off, put it on something, and it went down to room temperature, he can put it back on. But lower than room temperature, he cannot. If a food was cooked in a microwave oven, which nowadays doesn't really happen, there's a machloket on whether you can put that back on the fire. So let's say on someone is eating his challah, and he wants to dip it into the Kli Sheni, into the bowl, the soup, or he pours the soup onto a plate that has a piece of bread on it. Is that allowed? So it is permissible for a Sephardi Jew to pour boiling soup from a Kli Rishon onto bread in a bowl. So he has a bowl of bread. He has a bowl, bread inside. He takes the pot from the Kli Rishon and he pours soup in it. That's completely fine. We're not worried that it's going to warm the bread or anything. It is certainly permissible to immerse the bread into boiling hot soup that is in a bowl, which is a Kli Sheni. So let's say you're eating soup on Friday night. You want to take some of the challah and dip it in. That's fine. We're not worried that that you're going to be cooking the bread. One may not take solid frozen soup from the freezer and place it on the fire electric warming tray to become hot on Shabbat, since the soup, even though it is frozen, is considered a solid food, right? It's gonna heat up and become. We said earlier, cooking on Shabbat according to the Sfaradim, because it is liquid, even though it is frozen right now, and it is considered technically solid. It's not solid; it's still soup, and it is not allowed to put. You're not allowed to take that frozen soup and put it on the plata. If let's say you have pastries or burekas, or you have some kind of dessert, apple strudel that inside there's some kind of jelly or some kind of congealed fat that can warm up and almost, let's say, cook. Is that allowed to be put on the again? Okay. Sorry about that. Next week I'll figure something out about the Wi-Fi so it doesn't go on and on. Okay. So it is likewise permissible to place a pot containing vegetables and meat or fish with some liquid gravy and some congealed fat on top on another pot that is on a fire on Shabbat. Since the majority of the contents of the pot is solids, it is permissible to heat it again on Shabbat as long as it's not on an open fire. So again, it's on a platter or something. Because again, the majority of it is solid. So as long as the majority of it is solid, we are fine. Because it is forbidden to melt solids on Shabbat because it is considered creating something new. One of the Av Melachot is Molid, which is creating something new. And for them, when you melt something, it's creating something new, and that would be forbidden on Shabbat. So according to their custom, it is not only forbidden to reheat it on the fire, it is also forbidden to place the pot in the sun where the gravy can melt. So even if you don't want to use the electric orange tray, you want to bring it onto the sun. We said in general there's no problem with cooking something directly from the sun, but because this is not cooking, it's creating something new for the Ashkenazim, it is a problem. But again, the Sephardim, we don't hold like that. And if you want to take fat and melt it in the sun, it's allowed. And if you want to take it and put it on the majority of the solid food, that is also allowed, and you can eat it because it is mixed with the gravy, and it is never is visible as a separate entity. All the poskim permit one to place pastries over a covered fire on Shabbat if the amount of congealed fat is minimum. Again, we said as long as the majority of it is solid, we're good. If someone placed a pot of food that was already cooked on top of another pot of food that is on top of a fire, we need the board next time for the pictures. But basically, you have one pot and then another pot on top of that. And then afterwards on Shabbat, he removed the bottom pot from the fire. So I guess he has some kind of contraption. So he has the fire here. He has some kind of tripod, and he has a pot covering the fire. And then he put another pot on top of the tripod, which is on top of the pot. Now on Shabbat, he takes the bottom pot off. So now he has an open fire. So is that going to be something bad? Because now he's cooking technically, or he's on an open fire. So if he does that, some poskim ruled it is forbidden to place the top pot down directly over the covered fire, even if all its contents of chazara are fulfilled. Other poskim, however, ruled that as long as the conditions of chazara are fulfilled, it is permitted, and it is in practice the correct ruling. Of course, if the food in the top has not been completely cooked, you cannot return it. So what's the halakha? If he has this weird contraption, and he has the tripod, I guess, and then another pot over the fire, and he wants to put the pot, he can put it on top of the tripod, but he can't put it on top of the pot. That would be forbidden if he takes off the pot. I'm not 100% sure how he takes off the pot and leaves it on top of the pot. I guess if it's on the fire. So it can't, if he takes off the bottom pot and the top pot somehow gets on the fire, that's asur, that's prohibited. But if it's on some kind of tripod, so it's still not touching the fire, that would be fine. Nowadays, we don't have to worry about that too much. We don't cook on open fires for Shabbat. We have our platas, or we have our ovens, and therefore it's good. So let's just finish it off right here. If a pot of food that has already been cooked is sitting on the metal sheet that covers the fire, like we said, the plata or the metal sheet, and it is close enough to becoming scalding hot, but not directly over the fire, it is permissible on Shabbat to move it over to be directly over the fire. So you know that there's a certain spot that is hotter than the other part of the plata, right? So you can move it to that part that is hotter, and that's not an issue, even though it's going to be hotter and it's going to be cooking a little bit more. It's not considered cooking, again, because a majority of it is solid, and because there's no cooking after cooking. We're going to end it off there. Any questions? No questions? Okay. Next week, same time. Hopefully we can go downstairs. There was some meeting today, so sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, everyone.